Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Lester Kinsolving was not the White House's favorite journalist. He could have been. The syndicated conservative columnist wrote about religion and was widely read nationwide by the time he hit his stride in the 1970s. In the Reagan White House, though, the former Episcopalian priest was like a dog with a bone when he wanted answers. Kinsolving could also be contrary to the point of irritation to Republican stalwarts. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma and was famously anti-death penalty and pro-choice. He once referred to gay activists as the sodomy lobby, and he'd been defrocked after he came to believe that liberalism had taken over society and Episcopal doctrine. That ouster meant he now made journalism his ministry. No one could stand in his way. And because his opinions were printed, at one point, in 250 newspapers, he could not be avoided. No presidential press secretary he ever worked with wanted to call on him. But they did. That's how democracy works, after all, when it's done right. So it was not exactly a surprise when, in October 1982, Kinsolving raised his hand and asked Assistant Press Secretary Larry Speakes a question no one else had asked.
Does the President have any reaction to the announcement of the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta that AIDS is now an epidemic, over 600 cases? And over a third of them have died. It's known as gay plague. No, it is. I mean, it's a pretty serious thing that 1 in every 3 people that get this have died, and I wonder if the President is aware of it.
I don't have it. Are you? Do you?
You don't have it. Well, I'm relieved to hear that, Larry.
Do you?
No,
You didn't answer my question.
Well, I just wondered,
how do you know?
Does the President, in other words, the White House looks on this as a great joke.
No, I don't know anything about it, Lester.
Does anybody in the White House know about this epidemic, Larry?
I don't think so. I don't think there's been there's been no personal experience here, Lester.
By the time Kinsolving asked the question, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta had already issued numerous weekly reports on the topic. They had defined it for the public and expressed growing concern about it. By the time Kinsolving asked the question, medical researchers were already actively looking for funding to study the mysterious malady, and clinics were open in New York and San Francisco explicitly to deal with the ever-enlarging patient load. Laughter, derision, and avoidance aside, Kinsolving persisted for another 5 years to push for the president to address the topic. The president would only do so after fellow actor Rock Hudson died in October 1985, and even then, Reagan was obtuse and wary. He knew that his religious right constituency didn't want the leader of the free world to give any attention to this matter, ever. That's because they saw the root cause of the ongoing epidemic as repugnant, immoral behavior, and the disease was a harsh but real display of God's retribution for sinning in this way. It was as if, despite their showy Christian rhetoric, they decided some lives didn't matter. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Hims. You know, we talk a lot on this show about pressure, social pressure, work pressure, emotional pressure, and sometimes that pressure shows up in places people don't exactly feel like announcing to the world.
Yeah, and when it does, it can mess with your confidence fast. Suddenly you're stressed about being stressed, which does not help.
That's why I appreciate how straightforward HIMS is. It's designed to take something that already feels awkward and make it less so.
Everything happens online on your schedule. You connect with licensed medical providers, talk through what's going on, and see what treatment options make sense for you. And HIMS offers a range of options, including personalized treatments and more affordable generics. So it's not just, here's one solution, good luck.
Think of it as a reset button, a way to take something that's been weighing on you and deal with it directly without judgment.
And when you're not carrying that stress around, it frees you up to focus on everything else that actually matters.
To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/COTC.
That's hims.com/COTC for your free online visit. hims.com/COTC.
Featured products include compounded drug products, which the FDA does not approve or verify for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Actual price will depend on product and subscription plan. First, an acknowledgement. Most of our cases involve death, sometimes on a large scale, but none so far has been this massive. Because of the wording of the show's title, and because the deaths weren't attributable to murder rather than disease, some people will argue this doesn't qualify as a crime of the century. I'm going to respectfully disagree. Between 1981 and 1989, while Ronald Reagan was in office, nearly 90,000 Americans would be diagnosed with AIDS and more than 50,000 would die. In the intervening decades, we've learned that if action had been taken sooner, if funding had been allocated, if education campaigns had been launched, if the president had simply acknowledged the crisis, many of those deaths might have been avoided. The crime wasn't the disease itself. The crime was the silence, the mockery, the years of inaction while Americans died. And if you need a legal framework, government officials have a duty of care to protect public health. When they fail to act in the face of an epidemic and people die as a result, is that not still a crime? Just one committed through negligence rather than intent? At the time, this was major news. ACT UP protesters, the AIDS quilt, constant headlines. But today, many Americans don't know the history. They don't know about the years of silence or the thousands who died waiting for action. To understand how we got to that White House briefing room in October 1982, we need to go back to the beginning. The earliest known case of HIV-1 infection in human blood is from a sample taken in 1959 from a man who had died in Kinshasa in the Belgian Congo. By the way, that country is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Scientists have no idea when, prior to that, the virus known only in chimpanzees was introduced to humans. They're pretty sure that it happened when the blood of an infected chimp made contact with a hunter who injured himself while he was hunting, or maybe when he was butchering the animals. It may have happened when humans ate chimp meat. Suffice to say, it found its way into the bloodstream of Homo sapiens, mutated a bit, and from there found its way into the bodily fluids that we exchange through sex or when we share needles. That kind of repeated needle transference could have happened in Africa while someone was being treated for syphilis or hepatitis, both common on that continent. It reached Haiti in 1966. In 1968, we know that a young black man died of Kaposi sarcoma, or KS, in the United States. KS is now seen as an AIDS-defining cancer. According to AIDSmap, a leading source of information on the disease, by the late 1970s, based on the study of stored blood samples, 4% of gay men in San Francisco and 6% of gay men in New York were already infected. The gestation period from infection to when serious symptoms begin to present without treatment is sometimes as long as 10 years. It was the wrong disease at the wrong time for that community. As journalist Randy Schiltz wrote in As the Band Played On, which chronicled the first years of the epidemic, quote, during the 1970s, many gays had successfully thrown off the old social morality which once held us down. the morality of shame, concealment, and embarrassment, end quote. That meant that those who were gay were now free, thanks to the Stonewall riots and the burgeoning gay rights activism, to wholly and openly embrace their sexuality. It meant free love did not just apply to hippies and heterosexual college students. A June 5, 1981 report issued by the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta read in part, quote, "From October 1980 to May 1981, a doctor noticed that 5 young gay men were treated for pneumocystis carinii pneumonia at 3 different hospitals in Los Angeles," end quote. All 5 diagnoses had been confirmed by lung biopsy. The report mentioned that the men didn't know each other and had no common sexual partner. Doctors were a tad bewildered. Nobody died from pneumocystis carinii. Antibiotics can clear it up unless the patient is severely immunosuppressed. These guys didn't appear to be, but they were not getting better. Then, on July 3, 1981, the New York Times ran a brief inside story with the headline, "Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals." The story explained how a rare skin cancer, that's Kaposi sarcoma, or KS, was showing up in young, healthy men. According to the Cancer Research Institute, KS was previously known to primarily affect elderly men of Mediterranean and Jewish origin, and they could live with it for years. David Dunlop, a reporter for the Metro section of the paper of record at the time, explained to the History Channel that there was no real follow-up to that. In the early 1980s, he said, quote, "There were strong messages that you got that were not written on any whiteboard. You knew to avoid it. It was a self-reinforcing edict. Don't write about queers," end quote. Still, KS was soon enough being referred to on the streets as the gay cancer. As a small aside, the clustering of this cancer among connected groups of people was an important clue. Scientists suspected that whatever was destroying these men's immune systems might be transmissible, possibly a virus. The scientists who went down that path were able, a few years later, to identify the retrovirus that indeed causes AIDS. For their work, François Barré-Sinoussi and Luc Montagnier shared the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2008. They also shared it with Gerald Suhrhausen, who discovered the human papillomavirus that causes cervical cancer. What we know now about AIDS and KS and that particular pneumonia is that those things don't kill you. What does is the fact that the underlying virus, HIV, has already decimated your immune system so that opportunistic infections and cancers, once they get hold, never leave. We're really here to talk about Ronald Reagan because his silence on the AIDS crisis has been the subject of a long-running debate about how much, if any, blame he should carry for America's slow response to the health crisis. Is the question fair? Can one person be held responsible for mass death? Well, yes, sometimes. History has examples. But this one is less straightforward, because if you buy that he's responsible, it wasn't because of what he did, it's what he didn't do. To understand that silence, we need to understand where Reagan was coming from. Reagan's first statement on what was then referred to as homosexuality went on the record in 1967 when, during his first term as governor of California, he referred to it as a tragic illness. He and his wife Nancy, of course, had worked in Hollywood for years and were not known to be especially naive. Nancy, in particular, had many gay friends. And Reagan, despite serving as president of the Screen Actors Guild, was always this small government libertarian who didn't much care what you did in private because it wasn't his business. He had shown some early signs of this when, in 1978, as governor, he spoke out against a proposed Proposition 6. Here's John Briggs, the proposition's author.
We are going to restore morality to the classroom and remove blatant homosexuals from influencing and teaching our young.
Briggs explained that the proposition, when passed, would make sure every gay and lesbian teacher was forced out of their chosen profession. The proposition also provided for the ouster of anyone who supported their staying employed. Reagan thought the proposition was a serious infringement on civil, even constitutional rights. Publicly, he soft-pedaled, but said the proposition could be expensive to implement and could cause people harm. Challenged on that, he wrote an editorial in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner to further explain how he felt about Briggs. He wrote, quote, "Whatever else it is, homosexuality is not a contagious disease like the measles. Prevailing scientific opinion is that an individual's sexuality is determined at a very early age and that a child's teachers do not really influence this." End quote. The proposition was defeated by the work of many, but Reagan's influence should not be downplayed. He took heat from fundamentalist Christian leaders for that stand, but all was forgiven when he was nominated by the Republican Party to head the 1980 presidential ticket. The Reverend Jerry Falwell had by then claimed his place as a spokesperson for the religious right. In 1979, he co-founded the Moral Majority, a politically minded group that sought to mobilize conservatives into civic action. Falwell's popular televangelism made sure that the message was repeated early and often and was, as a matter of course, extremely well-funded by those who sent in small donations. Falwell, feeling his power, apparently made it clear to Reagan that the candidate had to toe the line to get his support. Reagan wanted to be president, so he agreed to a domestic agenda in line with that. In a 1980 campaign speech, Reagan told voters that the gay rights movement, quote, "isn't just asking for civil rights, it's asking for recognition and acceptance of an alternative lifestyle, which I do not believe society can condone, nor can I," end quote. Reagan won in a landslide with 489 electoral votes next to Jimmy Carter's 49. Falwell took credit. He said that Reagan had taken the White House only because of his religious rights support. Then Falwell doubled down. Post-election, he talked almost incessantly about homosexuality. He said gays were, quote, "shaking their fists in God's face," end quote. He went on to say that this breaking away of God's laws, see Leviticus, was a clear precursor to the end of days, see Revelations. Reagan had to hold fast or all was lost. Talk about pressure. Meanwhile, the CDC published a report in mid-1980 describing increasing requests for the drug pentamidine to treat pneumocystis carinii pneumonia and a spike in cases of Kaposi sarcoma. What had been concerning about that before was now downright alarming. Now, Reagan was fine with Nancy's gay hairdresser visiting the White House twice a week. He was fine, too, when she wanted her favorite interior decorator, Ted Graber, to bring his longtime partner to the White House as part of the festivities for her 60th birthday on July 6, 1981. He even offered the same-sex couple the Lincoln bedroom. But when it came to the illness ravaging the gay population, Reagan made no sign he even knew the problem existed. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Home Chef. After the holidays, I hit that wall where cooking feels like one more decision my brain can just not make.
Yeah, January dinner planning is brutal.
Which is exactly why Home Chef has been such a lifesaver. Having fresh, pre-portioned meals show up takes a huge weight off my plate, literally.
And it's not just easy food. Home Chef is actually rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease.
The recipes are straightforward, the ingredients are fresh, and everything actually tastes like something you would want to eat again. No mystery sauces, no stress.
Plus, now they've got dishes co-created with celebrity chefs like Gordon Ramsay, so you're getting restaurant-quality meals without leaving the house.
You'll find those across Home Chef's culinary collection, classic meal kits, and express options. Basically, whatever kind of night you're having.
30-minute meals, oven-ready trays, quick microwave lunches, and there's even a family menu with 4 or 6 serving dinners.
For a limited time, Home Chef is offering offering my listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/COTC.
That's homechef.com/COTC for 50% off your first box and free dessert for life.
homechef.com/COTC. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Up to this point, the disease had the informal name Gay-Related Infectious Disease, or GRID. That was pretty specific. But then, new cases with similar presenting symptoms were being reported as the result of blood transfusions and possible mother-to-child transmission. On September 24, 1982, the CDC moved to change the name GRID to AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. Specifically at risk, the CDC said, were gay men, intravenous drug users, those of Haitian origin, and hemophiliacs. On October 15, 1982, reporter and columnist Kinsolving asked that first question in the daily press briefing at the White House. By that time, the CDC had been issuing regular reports on the disease for a year in its Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. That agency reported to then, and still does, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Its director is nominated by the president and requires Senate confirmation. That meant that the U.S. government knew that an average of one new case of AIDS was now being reported every day. It should have also been aware that its own scientists knew that we could be facing a widespread contagion before we had any answer as to what was causing it. And yet, no one told anyone at the White House?
No, I don't know anything about it, Lester.
Hard to figure. This is just a few months after the San Francisco Chronicle put reporter Randy Shilts, a man who did not bother to hide his own sexual orientation from anyone, on the AIDS beat. Shilts found out that epidemiologists Michael Gorman and Andrew Moss had published a report showing that, within the neighborhoods in San Francisco with a concentrated gay density, 1 in 350 men was infected with the virus. So sure of the growing concern, the two researchers had even given the data to gay leaders before they published it in the esteemed British medical journal Lancet. The Bay Area's gay leaders had bickered about whom to tell and how. They dawdled for 2 months. Shilts found out, and the Chronicle ran the story. He was, in effect, forcing the epidemiologist's hand. Michael Lee, author of a Shilts biography, wrote that the journalist understood too well that the once liberating bathhouse subculture, with its rampant promiscuity and freewheeling, anything-goes joie de vivre, played an undeniable role in the virus's exponential spread. But Shilts also understood the dilemma his own community's leaders faced. We tend to forget how it was in the 1980s for gay Americans. Most gays and lesbians remained closeted for fear of losing their privacy, their families, and their jobs. While the degree to which they feared being victims of physical violence and social ostracism depended on where they lived, no place was totally safe. It should be noted, too, that homosexuality was still a crime in some states, like in Georgia, for example, where I wrote my first piece of journalism about AIDS in the late 1980s for my middle school paper. Hostility and open derision against gay people were common, even in polite company. In fact, as Lester Kinsolving, the solidly middle-class conservative, continued to badger the White House, Spokesman Speaks made jokes which questioned Kinsolving's sexuality, and that was apparently okay. Shilts, and notably his editors and publisher, did not shy away from writing what they knew. By the end of 1981, the CDC was looking at 337 verified cases of AIDS and 130 deaths. Bypassing the White House, the U.S. Congress convened its first hearing on HIV and AIDS in April of 1982. Those hearings took place in Los Angeles after the White House budget director, David Stockman, had targeted public health agencies for big cuts. The field hearing was chaired by U.S. Representative Harry Waxman, a Democrat who represented West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and Santa Monica, who had sought out information about the disease early on as it seemed to have serious implications for his constituency. According to The Atlantic, reporting in 2011, just one reporter attended the hearing. Nevertheless, Waxman and his congressional allies were able to tuck the first federal funding for AIDS research in a bill that was meant to fund public health efforts against toxic shock syndrome and Legionnaire's disease. Reagan, in turn, soon cut funding to the CDC and to the National Institutes of Health. By the end of 1982, researchers estimated that more than 1,000 Americans were infected with HIV. It hardly registered. The New York Times wrote 3 stories about AIDS in 1981. They published just 3 more in 1982. As 1983 dawned, the lack of concern about the crisis came into sharper focus. That's reflected in this memo to Dr. Walter Dowdle, Assistant Director of the CDC, written by a staffer on April 12, 1983. Quote, "The inadequate funding to date has seriously restricted our work and has presumably deepened the invasion of this disease into the American population. In addition, the time wasted pursuing money from Washington has cast an air of despair over AIDS workers throughout the country." End quote. Most AIDS workers throughout the country were, in fact, gay men who had tested positive but weren't yet sick, as well as lesbians who organized blood drives and provided care and support for the stricken. The nation's apparent failure to acknowledge what was happening to gay Americans did much to politicize the gay community, ultimately contributing to their fervent efforts to demand basic human rights. The crisis also tended to open the eyes of those who had not otherwise seen that their beloved brothers, uncles, nephews, teachers, or neighbors were gay, and just like them, ordinary people just living their lives. By the end of 1983, the country had reported 4,700 cases of HIV/AIDS. Of that, 2,304 had died. But on April 23, 1984, there was good news.
This is NBC Nightly News, reported by Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Researchers now believe that they have made a monumental breakthrough in the fight against AIDS. U.S. government scientists announced in Washington today they have isolated a virus they believe causes AIDS. And the French have made a similar breakthrough in their AIDS research. But this breakthrough makes it possible to identify AIDS victims and carriers.
Back in the White House briefing room, Kinsolving posed new questions to Larry Speakes, who at first joked, then explained that the president had been keeping an eye on the crisis. Here's the exchange, which took place June 13th, 1984. It began with Larry answering a totally unrelated question a reporter had about fairy tales.
Lester's ears perked up when you said fairies.
Larry, does the president think that it might help if he suggested that the gays cut down on their cruising?
Okay, then. Told you.
I didn't hear your answer, Larry.
I just was acknowledging your interest in this subject.
You don't think that it would help if the gays cut down on their cruising?
We're researching it. If we come up with any research that sheds some light on whether gays should cruise or not cruise, we'll make it available to you.
To summarize, Kinsolving got nowhere. Speakes told him nothing. As with most presidents, hey, let's be real, most politicians, period, Reagan often sent mixed messages about his core beliefs. On June 29, 1984, speaking to a group of elected women officials, Reagan said,
"There is no place in the Republican Party for those who would exhibit prejudice against anyone. There's no place in our party for the kind of bigotry and ugly rhetoric that we've been hearing outside our party recently. We have no room for hate here, and we have no place for the haters."
Gay Americans must have wondered why they were the exception. The president, of course, had good company in ignoring this prejudice, which was feeding the AIDS crisis. Many churches joined him, for example. Mainstream and even liberal Christians were slow to confront the epidemic, writes Anthony Petro, an associate professor of religion at Boston University and author of After the Wrath of God, AIDS, Sexuality, and American Religion. Petro noted that it wasn't until the mid-1980s that anything appeared about the disease in mainstream religious publications like Christian Century and Christianity Today. And it wasn't until the late 1980s that mainstream denominations decided that compassion had to trump squeamishness and judgment. But that was still a few years away. On December 11th, 1984, as the year was coming to a close, Kinsolving and Speaks again verbally battered each other about the topic.
Lester's beginning to circle now. He's moving in front. Go ahead.
It's the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. Reports that an estimated...
You were
Look,
close.
could I ask a question, Mark?
You were close.
An estimated 300,000 people have been exposed to AIDS, which can be transmitted through saliva. Will the President, as Commander-in-Chief, take steps to protect armed forces, food, and medical services from AIDS patients or those who run the risk of spreading AIDS, in the same manner that they forbid typhoid fever people from being involved in the health or food services?
I don't know.
Well, is the President concerned about this subject, Larry? That
I haven't
seems
heard
to
him
have
express
evoked so much
concern.
reaction here.
I haven't heard
It
him
isn't only the
express.
jocks, Lester.
Has he sworn off water faucets?
No, but I mean, is he going to do anything, Larry?
Lester, I have not heard him express anything.
You
I'm
mean
sorry.
he has expressed no opinion about this epidemic?
No, but I must confess I haven't asked him about it.
Would you ask him, Larry?
Go back into the problem.
Have you been checked?
Now, Kinsolving was wrong about AIDS being transmitted through saliva. There was a lot of misinformation when the thing was still new. The virus exists in tiny amounts in spit, but to date, there's never been a documented case of it being transmitted that way. But he was right about the urgency. By the end of 1984, more than 4,251 people had died, and another 8,000 cases had been reported. This virus was just getting started. Hey everyone, before we get back to the show, just a reminder that you can get bonus episodes and bonus material at grabbagcollab.com. Just go to grabbagcollab.com and choose which tier you'd like to subscribe to. Thanks so much. Randy Shilts was born to a family of anti-war Republicans who supported conservative 1964 presidential candidate Barry Goldwater and were more often than not members of the John Birch Society. That's an American right-wing political advocacy group. Shilts had been an Eagle Scout and a card-carrying member of Students for Reagan and Young Americans for Freedom while he was in high school. He never really abandoned those beliefs, but he did wholeheartedly embrace his sexuality and the new freedom that came with it. He had even worked for a time as a clerk at the Majestic, a Portland, Oregon bathhouse for $2.50 an hour. California had decriminalized sodomy in 1976. Bathhouses, which had historically been places where someone gay could feel safe, flourished as a result. By 1984, the city was rethinking its own tolerance of them. Led by Dr. Melvin Silverman, the city's director of the Department of Public Health, the city ordered 14 businesses to close, labeling them a public health danger. The city also banned high-risk sexual behaviors. Shilts' insistent reporting would find him at odds with his friends. They felt he was siding with the city. Legal battles over the closures continued until November 1984, when a court order forced the houses to remove private rooms so that health officials could, if they chose to, use law enforcement to monitor the activity there. This monitoring was uncomfortably sanctioned by then-Mayor Dianne Feinstein. The discomfort didn't last long. The November action effectively closed the bathhouses permanently. As an aside, interviews with those who knew him suggest that Shilts had not given up the bathhouses altogether himself, and he knew the risks better than anyone. But all this was a bit like closing the barn door after the horse got out. the horse was already loose. By now, the virus was known to be in America's blood supply, something doctors had suspected to be true for at least 2 years. More women, either partners of bisexual men, sex workers, or intravenous drug users who reuse needles, were also being diagnosed, as were hemophiliacs who needed donated plasma and blood to survive. The disease would ultimately kill 10,000 of them. In early March 1985, the first commercial HIV blood test, a simple blood draw, was approved by the Food and Drug Administration. This elicited a heated debate among those in the gay community about whether or not being tested was a good idea. Did you want to know you were going to die? Did you have to tell anyone if you were positive? In mid-April, the CDC, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the World Health Organization held its first international conference on AIDS. More than 50 countries were represented by some 3,000 attendees. The conference had taken a year to plan and pull off. This was to be a worldwide comparing of notes and the sharing of information among those on the front lines. The New York Times put the news of the event on page C4. But that didn't mean everyone outside of the scientific community was silent. According to reporter Karen Tumulty, writing in the April 12, 2021 issue of The Atlantic, quote, "What wasn't known at the time was that, as the death toll mounted, a pitched battle had ensued within the Reagan White House and within the Reagan family, as First Lady Nancy Reagan and son Ron tried to shake the president out of his complacency," end quote. I mean, on one hand, they begged for him to show compassion. On the other, his hardline advisors still advised framing it as a moral and religious crisis. But Ron was his own man. I mean, this was a guy who in the late 1970s and early 1980s was a dancer for the Joffrey Ballet. His sexuality was routinely questioned by tabloids. For the record, he's been married twice, both to women. Now, he repeatedly told his father he had seen a lot of friends get sick and die agonizing deaths. Per The Atlantic, Ron and his mother sought out any opportunity to talk to the president about AIDS. Ron told Tumulty that his mother could understand abstract concepts, but it was easier for her to grasp the urgency when there was a human face attached. Soon, news broke that would provide one even the president couldn't ignore. Rock Hudson was just 59 years old, and he had long been an acquaintance of the Reagans, particularly of Mrs. Reagan. The two had long been personal friends. His recent weakening and obvious weight loss had been in the news.
It takes no expert to see that something is seriously wrong with the 59-year-old actor. Here he is just a few years ago on the Live at 5 set. And here, just last week, with a former co-star Doris Day, down considerably from the 200 pounds Hudson normally carried on his 6'4" frame.
Hudson had blamed the flu, but the Reagan Library's archives reveal that on July 24, 1985, Dale Olson, Hudson's publicist, addressed a request to the president's assistant press secretary Mark Weinberg, asking if the first couple could do anything to help Hudson move to a French military hospital for special AIDS care. When Hudson's people had asked the hospital to admit him, the French had declined. For one thing, Hudson wasn't French, and one suspects they didn't want the press attention. Nancy knew she couldn't do much, but her office referred the matter to the American embassy in Paris. This was a bit of a pickle for the president's people. Many were dying, and if the world found out that Mrs. Reagan had gone out of her way to save a friend, a rich Hollywood legend friend at that, it would have not been seen in the best light. Turned out it didn't matter. The day after his outreach to Nancy, Hudson directed his people to issue a statement.
Mr. Rock Hudson has acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which was diagnosed over a year ago in the United States.
Randy Schiltz later reported that when the French doctors took a look at Hudson, he was clearly too far along in the progression of the disease for anyone to do much. He died October 2nd, 1985.
Good evening, I'm Roger Grimsby. Here now the news. Actor Rock Hudson dead. His year-long battle with AIDS at an end. He was 59. Hudson died quietly in his sleep this morning at his home in Beverly Hills. He was found dead by members of his household staff.
The Reagans issued a joint statement that read, quote, "Nancy and I are saddened by the news of Rock Hudson's death. He will always be remembered for his dynamic impact on the film industry, and fans all over the world will certainly mourn his loss. He will be remembered for his humanity, his sympathetic spirit, and well-deserved reputation for kindness. May God rest his soul," end quote. That very day, the U.S. House voted to increase 1986 federal spending for AIDS research by 90% to $190 million, $70 million more than the administration had asked for over the next year. Wire services noted that, quote, "A small knot of conservatives used the debate on the deadly disease to launch an attack on homosexual behavior," end quote. This debate was the first time that California Republican William Dannemeyer uttered the now famous jab that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Hudson's death was fodder for almost every media venue. When his death was discussed, people for sure mentioned his prodigious film accomplishments, but that was quickly eclipsed by discussions of how he had died. The San Francisco Chronicle put the news of his death by AIDS over the masthead on the front page in words large enough that they could be read from 2 blocks away. This was a turning point, the editors knew. This was how the stalling and the shuffling and the whispering could end. They weren't wrong. After Hudson's death, in just 8 weeks, almost $2 million was donated to help support AIDS research and care for those who were now suffering. That was twice as much as had been given for that purpose in all of 1984. Nobody was laughing with Larry Speaks now, at least not in public. In 1986, Bob Woodward reported in the Washington Post that, during a meeting with his national security advisors, Reagan mentioned that Muammar Gaddafi liked to dress up. The president, a former governor of California, then said, quote, "Why don't we invite Gaddafi to San Francisco?" End quote. That got a chuckle all around. Then, per Woodward, Secretary of State George Shultz replied, "Why don't we give him AIDS?" Upon reading the exchange, the city of San Francisco demanded an apology. Reagan did speak about AIDS on September 17, 1985, not directly to the nation, but rather while fielding questions from the media. He called it a top priority. At that time, he also defended his administration's response and research funding. But to call it a settled question now for Reagan and his people would be a mistake. Close friend and Reagan ally William Buckley suggested in 1986 that we tattoo those who were HIV positive so we all would know who to shun. White House Communications Director Pat Buchanan was reported to have said, quote, "The poor homosexuals, they have declared war upon nature, and now nature is exacting an awful retribution," end quote. Not to be outdone, Rep. Dannemeyer took his bigotry straight to the House floor. In a speech titled, "What Homosexuals Do," he read graphic descriptions of sexual acts into the congressional record. As if that weren't enough, he pushed to create a government register of AIDS patients, along with quarantines and deportation measures. Public health researchers later noted that the fear generated by these proposals made it even harder to get gay men to come forward for testing or to participate in studies that might have helped contain the disease. Reagan, who had still not addressed the matter directly with the nation, did call upon medical and scientific communities to make AIDS one of our highest public health priorities. He asked his Surgeon General, Dr. C. Everett Koop, to prepare a report on the disease so he could read up. Yet on the same day he asked for that report, his administration gave a budget to Congress that sharply reduced federal spending on the epidemic and on anything that was being done to help those in care. By now, it was not just Schultz and the San Francisco or gay media that were watching, because a few months before Hudson's death, a 12-year-old hemophiliac from Kokomo, Indiana, was denied the right to attend public school because he had become infected through a blood transfusion a year earlier. Other children's parents had demanded his ouster. His name was Ryan White. In the eyes of some, this was the first known quote-unquote innocent victim. He hadn't had any of that nasty sex. He hadn't shot heroin. He had simply gotten a medically necessary blood transfusion. Ryan became a cause célèbre, made the cover of People magazine. He did Oprah. He talked to any news outlet that asked. He appeared at fundraisers and benefits, hobnobbing with Elton John and Michael Jackson and, yep, the Reagans. And the number of stories about AIDS that appeared in the media doubled between 1985 and 1987. Meanwhile, charged with educating the president on the topic, Surgeon General Koop went to his own personal physician to get the facts. A thinking person might wonder why he didn't already know the facts. Well, he tried to explain why that was in his autobiography, Koop, Memoirs of America's Family Doctor. Quote, "For an astonishing 5.5 years, I was completely cut off from AIDS. I was told by the Assistant Secretary for Health, my immediate boss, that I would not be assigned to cover AIDS. The department took its cue from him. Even though the Centers for Disease Control commissioned the first AIDS task force as early as June 1981, I, as Surgeon General, was not allowed to speak about AIDS publicly until the second Reagan term. Whenever I spoke on a health issue at a press conference or on a network morning TV show, the government public affairs people told the media in advance that I would not answer questions on AIDS and I was not to be asked questions on the subject." End quote. Oddly enough, Koop's personal doctor was Anthony Fauci, then director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Fauci gave him an earful. The result was a call to arms, a 36-page report that put the crisis in public health terms, stripped of any disclosure fears and political grandstanding. Koop released it to the public on October 2nd, 1986, bypassing a first stop of oversight by the White House. A version of it was sent to every American home, and Koop was smart. He prefaced anyone's reading of it with a cautionary note. Quote, "Some of the issues involved in this brochure may not be things you're used to discussing openly. I can easily understand that. But now you must discuss them." End quote. Later, in a public service announcement, he said,
"Let's stop the rumors and misinformation about AIDS. The virus that causes AIDS is not highly contagious. It is not spread through everyday casual contact with infected people at work or school, in restaurants, or other public places. AIDS is spread mainly through a variety of sexual and drug-related behaviors. The virus can also be passed from a pregnant woman to her unborn or newborn baby. All of us, men and women alike, must learn what we can do to protect ourselves and others from this infection. The epidemic of AIDS can and must be stopped."
He strongly recommended a nationwide program of AIDS education, even for children as young as 6. He preached the widespread use of condoms. He said people shouldn't have to worry about losing their jobs, their insurance, or their dignity when diagnosed. Reagan did not meet with Koop about the report. He made no official speech acknowledging it. Right-wing opponent of the Equal Rights Amendment, Phyllis Schlafly, did. She said the report was a tacit approval for grammar school sodomy. Finally, Reagan gave his first major speech about AIDS on May 31st, 1987. He had been invited by Reagan pal and Rock Hudson confidant, Elizabeth Taylor, to speak to a black tie event given by AMFAR, the American Foundation for AIDS Research. His advisors had argued over what the president could or should say. Reagan began the speech with an off-target anecdote which flopped. He did not utter the words homosexual or gay. He said that federal prisoners would be screened, as would those seeking a marriage license or wanting to enter the country. He emphasized more funding and struck a note for empathy.
America faces a disease that is fatal and spreading, and this calls for urgency, not panic. It calls for compassion, not blame. And it calls for understanding, not ignorance.
Then he added,
"Final judgment is up to God."
Though he himself wasn't quite done judging either. He told the New York Times that abstinence was the best way to slow the disease. Quote, "After all, when it comes to preventing AIDS, don't medicine and morality teach the same lesson?" End quote. That's up for debate. So is Reagan's culpability in the ultimate body count. What we know is that newspapers were covering the epidemic by 1981. If the president had acknowledged the crisis sooner, there might have been prevention campaigns like ones that eventually proved effective in cities like San Francisco. There could have been reduced stigma earlier on and more testing, which could have slowed the spread. There could have been more funding assigned earlier, which would have helped the medical community learn faster what they were facing and probably allow for moves like protecting the nation's blood supply sooner. In late 1987, Reagan signed an executive order creating the President's Commission on the HIV epidemic to investigate and recommend measures that federal, state, and local governments could take in response. Soon, the media was referring to the panel as the Watkins Commission, named after James Watkins, its chair. Nancy demanded that the 13-member panel include someone gay. Also that year, Ron Reagan Jr. appeared in a TV commercial saying the federal government wasn't moving fast enough to stem the spread of the disease. He advised writing your congressman or someone higher up. He also appeared in educational videos on the topic. In early 1988, the Watkins Commission issued a preliminary report that called for a whopping $20 billion budget to fight the disease in the coming decade. The final report was issued that June. It spoke plainly, saying that there had been a, quote, distinct lack of leadership, end quote, from the federal government on the matter. By a vote of 7-6, the commission advocated against every measure sought for by conservatives who had been vocal in their demands. The panel had 500 recommendations, but if we're focusing on the highlights, they basically asked for more testing, more research, more prevention, more education, and an end to stereotyping, stigmatization, and discrimination against those who were afflicted. Reagan was given the commission's recommendations to guide him in the final year of his presidency. He did nothing with it. And the dying continued. By 1988, HIV and AIDS had become the third leading cause of death for men aged 25 to 44 in the United States. By 1989, it was the second leading cause. Between 1981 and 1987, 95.5% of those diagnosed with AIDS died. While he was in office, almost 83,000 cases of AIDS were confirmed and 50,000 had died. Reagan left office on January 20th, 1989. By the end of 1990, the number dead from the disease surpassed 100,000. To date, the AIDS epidemic has claimed about 44 million lives. It's no longer the death sentence it was. As of 2024, some 40 million people are living with HIV, about 1.2 million of those in America. Randy Shilts died of AIDS in 1994. He was 42. Given just 6 months to live after his diagnosis, Ryan White lived 5 more years. He died April 8, 1990. He was just 18 and a month shy of his high school graduation. To report and write this episode, journalist Amy Wilson read several books, including And the Band Played On by Randy Shilts. She also read When the Band Played On, The Life of Randy Shilts by Michael G. Lee, and Serious Adverse Events, The Uncensored History of AIDS by Celia Farber. She spent some time in the Reagan Library's digital archives, as well as the archives of the San Francisco Chronicle and the New York Times. She read the pertinent CDC directives, its mortality weekly reports, and a few histories of the disease as prepared by the History Channel and others. The Atlantic's excerpt of Karen Tumulty's book, The Triumph of Nancy Reagan, was particularly instructive. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Head to www.grabbagcollab.com for exclusive content related to this show and access to other series on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and sometimes my child, Hunt Van Benskoten. Other music comes from Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, please help us out by rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts. Also tell your friends. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're @centuriespod, and you can find us on the Crimes of the Centuries Facebook page.